I always thought family sacrifices were shared, that when money was tight, everyone chipped in or gave something up for the collective good. At least, that's what my parents told me when they made me apply only to in-state public colleges. I had dreams of going to a private art school in New York, but they said it was too expensive, too impractical. "Sweetheart, we just can't afford that right now," Mom said, placing a hand over mine like she was comforting a child who had asked for something absurd. "You know we love you, but we have to be realistic." So I settled. I went to the cheapest state school I could find, commuted from home for the first 2 years, and worked a part-time job on campus. I even skipped spring break trips and summer internships out of state because my parents needed help around the house. And I did it all with a quiet sense of loyalty. I told myself this was what being part of a family meant: compromise, sacrifice, putting others first when needed. Then came the wedding. My older brother, Jason, got engaged right around my senior year. He was the golden child, the straight-A student, the charming one, the future doctor who could do no wrong. While I was grinding through final exams and putting together my senior art portfolio using leftover supplies and borrowed materials, my parents were planning a wedding worthy of royalty. I remember coming home one afternoon to find my mom scrolling through wedding venues on her laptop. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Oh, honey, you wouldn't believe the deals they're offering for early bookings at Lakeside Manor. It's only $8,000 for the weekend." I blinked. "8,000? For the venue?" she replied. "Catering is separate." I stood there in stunned silence. This was the same woman who told me, with tears in her eyes, that my dream school was financially irresponsible. Now she was gushing over floral arrangements and imported champagne like we'd won the lottery. I brought it up, gently, cautiously. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I just needed to understand. I thought we were tight on money. I said, "That's why I didn't go to art school, right?" Mom didn't even flinch. "Jason's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. You'll understand when it's your turn." My turn? I wasn't even dating anyone. And by then, I already knew I'd never get a wedding like Jason's. The rules were just different for him. He was the investment. I was the expense. Dad tried to soften it later that week. He took me out for coffee and gave me a lecture on priorities, how weddings were important family milestones, and how I was still getting a great education. He used phrases like big picture and doing what's best for everyone. I nodded and smiled, but inside I was screaming, because everyone didn't include me. Not really. Not when it came to celebrating. Not when it came to spending. Not when it came to value. I watched as my parents dropped over $30,000 on Jason's wedding. There was a live band, a 5-tier cake, a designer dress for the bride. Yes, they paid for that too. Custom suits, and a honeymoon fund they contributed to like it was a second mortgage. All the while, I was scrounging to pay off my student loans and eating instant noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. The bitterness didn't come all at once. It built slowly. It settled in the cracks of my relationship with them, like water and stone, freezing and expanding with every injustice they dismissed. After graduation, I moved out. I rented a tiny 1-bedroom apartment and threw myself into freelance work, designing logos, painting commissions, anything I could get. It wasn't glamorous, and the money wasn't great at first, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something for me. No compromises, no justifications. My art started gaining traction online. I began posting my process, engaging with followers, and joining small virtual galleries. It wasn't long before a few big-name accounts started sharing my work. One of my digital pieces went viral on Pinterest, and suddenly I was flooded with commission requests and interview offers. Meanwhile, Jason and his wife were moving in with my parents. Turns out, the honeymoon phase didn't last long, and neither did their financial stability. Jason had switched careers and was in between jobs. My parents didn't talk about it much, but I knew. I saw the tension in their voices, the stress, in their emails, but they never asked me how I was doing. Never said, "Hey, we're proud of you." Not even once. It was like my success didn't count because it didn't look like Jason's. There was no degree from a top university, no office, with a nameplate, no stethoscope around my neck. Just canvases, tablets, and late nights filled with caffeine and paint stains. But I was getting there. Quietly, steadily, on my own. Then came the moment that changed everything. A celebrity, a real one, someone with millions of followers, purchased one of my pieces. I didn't believe it at first. I thought it was a scam. But it was real. They bought the original for $12,000 and posted about it online. Within hours, I gained over 100,000 new followers. My website crashed. Commissions sold out. My inbox overflowed with collaboration offers and gallery requests. That one post catapulted me from struggling artist to sought-after creator. Within 6 months, I had made over $100,000 in sales. And that's when the calls started coming from home again. At first, the calls were casual. Mom wanted to check in more often, suddenly interested in what I'd been up to. Dad asked about that online art thing and whether I was still dabbling in it. Jason even texted me once, which he hadn't done in years, congratulating me on the celebrity purchase. Though he spelled the celebrity's name wrong, I knew what was happening. They'd seen the post. They'd read the comments. They realized the daughter they thought of as a starving artist had become someone valuable. Suddenly, I wasn't just the artsy one. I was the one with buzz, income, influence, and then the favor requests started. "We're thinking about expanding the house," Mom said one evening, her voice syrupy sweet. "You know, if you ever wanted to invest in something secure with your earnings." Secure, as if art wasn't a real job. As if what I had done, built a business, a brand, a future, was just a fluke they could cash in on. Dad called a few days later and asked if I'd consider helping Jason out a little. Apparently, the new job he'd taken had fallen through. They were behind on credit card payments from the wedding. "It would mean the world to us," he said. I said no. It was the first time in my life I'd ever said no to my parents about something serious. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just calmly explained that I wasn't in a position to bail out the same people who told me my dreams weren't worth investing in. Mom cried. She said I was being selfish. That family was supposed to support one another. That Jason needed me. Reminded her of the time I needed support, and how no one had fought for my dream. The next few weeks were cold. Texts slowed. Calls stopped. I was used to the silence, though. It had been there before, when I needed encouragement, when I was scraping together bus fare, when I spent nights crying in my room because I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Not at school, not at home. But the silence this time didn't hurt. It felt deserved. One day, I received an email from a prestigious gallery in New York. They wanted to feature me in their upcoming exhibit, Modern Voices, Art from the Margins. They offered a full expense-paid trip, plus a $15,000 honorarium, for the showcase. It was the kind of recognition I used to dream about. I called my best friend, sobbing with joy. I didn't tell my parents. That same week, I moved into a bigger apartment, one with an actual studio, natural light, and a kitchen I didn't have to share with cockroaches. I hired a part-time assistant to help manage my schedule and orders. I launched a mentorship program for young artists who, like me, had been told they weren't practical enough to succeed. A month later, my parents showed up at my door. No call, no warning, just knocked and smiled like everything was fine. "We thought we'd surprise you," Mom said, holding a basket of cookies she clearly hadn't baked herself. Dad was behind her, a little awkward, hands stuffed in his pockets. I invited them in. I wasn't heartless, just guarded. They complimented the apartment, asked about the furniture, commented on how grown up it all felt. Then, over tea, they dropped it. The real reason for the visit. "Your brother's struggling. Dad said, looking at the floor. They're thinking about moving again. He's not getting interviews. I sipped my tea. And? I asked. Mom put a hand on my arm. We were hoping maybe you could loan them something, just to get through the next few months. Something. Inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in finality. A thread that had frayed for years finally broke. I love you both, I said, but I'm not your safety net. They stared at me like I'd spoken a different language. I needed help. Once, I continued, and you told me to be realistic. You told me no. You spent 30 grand on a wedding and wouldn't spend a fraction of that on my education. And now you want me to undo the mess that came after? We didn't know, Mom whispered. We didn't know you'd become this. That's the point, I said. You never believed I could. There was no dramatic shouting, no storming out, just a long, painful silence that filled the room like smoke. Eventually, they left. Later that night, I received a text from Jason. Thanks for nothing. I blocked the number, not because I hate him, not because I don't care, but because boundaries are necessary, especially with people who only remember your worth when it benefits them. And for the first time in my life, I was living without guilt. My phone stayed quiet for a while after that. No more guilt-tripping texts, no unexpected knocks at my door. It was as if my boundaries had built a wall, not out of anger, but clarity. For the first time, my life was mine, not something I had to explain, justify, or shrink down to make others comfortable. And then, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a university. Not just any school. The same prestigious art school I'd originally applied to, the one my parents told me we couldn't afford, the one I'd given up on years ago. They were inviting me back, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. They wanted me to speak about self-made artists, resilience, and finding creative success outside traditional routes. I stared at the message for a long time. There I was, the girl who once couldn't afford the materials for a basic portfolio, being asked to speak to a room full of students who likely had the support I never got. And instead of feeling bitter, I felt ready. When I stood in front of that lecture hall weeks later, it was surreal. I looked out at those young faces, some eager, some skeptical, and I told them everything. About the rejection, the disappointment, the silent dinners at home, the nights I cried in a dorm I never chose. The way people only respected art when it had a price tag attached. But more than that, I talked about how I built something anyway. How I failed again and again and still kept painting. How I sold art from a shoebox apartment while working. 3 jobs. And how eventually someone noticed. Then another. And suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. After the talk, a girl came up to me. She was maybe 19, clutching a sketchbook covered in stickers. My parents don't support. Me either, she said. But seeing you up there, it makes me think maybe I can do it too. I smiled and hugged her. You can. You absolutely can. That night, I got home and sat in my new studio. I looked around, at the walls covered in canvas, the light streaming in, the brushes I used to dream about affording. I thought about that quiet kid I used to be, afraid to ask for too much, trained to believe I wasn't worth the investment. And then my phone rang. It was my mom. For a moment, I debated whether to answer, but something told me to listen, not out of obligation, but curiosity. Hi, I said. She hesitated on the other end. Your father and I watched your lecture. A friend sent us the link. Oh, there was a pause. You were amazing, she said, voice trembling. I didn't know how much we hurt you. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry, she whispered. That part, the apology, didn't fix everything. It didn't erase years of feeling like second best or overlooked, but it mattered. I appreciate that, I said quietly. I don't expect anything, she continued. I just wanted you to know we're proud of you. We were wrong. About everything. I could have cried. I didn't. Not then, but something inside me softened. We hung up after a few more quiet words. There was no begging, no manipulation, just acknowledgement. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my dad, handwritten. Inside was a photo of me at 6 years old, covered in finger paint, proudly holding up a messy rainbow. I found this in the attic, the note said. You always saw the world differently. I just wish I'd understood it sooner. I kept that photo. Not because I needed their approval now. I didn't. But because it reminded me that I'd been this person all along. Brave. Creative. Determined. Even when nobody else believed it. And now, I was living proof that betting on yourself, no matter who doubts you, can be the best investment you ever make. Months passed, and life kept evolving. My art business grew beyond anything I'd dreamed of in that cramped dorm room all those years ago. I was no longer just selling paintings. I was curating galleries, collaborating with global designers, and being invited to panels alongside artists I once idolized. I wasn't doing it to prove anything anymore. I was doing it because it was mine. Built from every moment of being underestimated, every dismissal, every time someone called art a hobby. One afternoon, I got a message from my brother. It had been a long time since we'd spoken directly. His wedding had come and gone. No apology, no explanation. But this message was different. He asked if we could talk. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part that remembered how it felt to be excluded and misunderstood, told me to hear him out. So I agreed to meet for coffee. He showed up looking tired. Not in the usual, newlywed kind of way, but like someone who'd been carrying a weight he hadn't acknowledged. I owe you a lot of things, he said as we sat down. An apology, a thank you, an explanation. I stayed quiet. He admitted that things hadn't been as picture-perfect as they'd seemed. That the wedding, the massive, flashy event our parents dumped thousands into, left him and his wife in debt, despite all the help. That he had struggled finding a footing in his new job. That the pressure to be the golden child was suffocating once the applause faded. I used to envy how our parents treated me, he said. Now I realized they were just handing me expectations with a ribbon. I wasn't expecting that level of honesty. He looked up at me. You made it without any of that. You created something out of nothing. You were the strong one. That hit harder than I expected. We didn't fix everything that day, but we found something better than closure. We found understanding. A new kind of relationship, free of competition or comparison. Later that year, I bought a small building downtown, part gallery, part studio, part teaching space for young artists who didn't have support at home. I named it Second Choice, because that's what I'd always been. The second choice for resources. The second choice for support. The second choice for dreams. But sometimes, second choices fight harder. They grow stronger roots. They last longer. At the grand opening, people from all over came. Some who had supported me early. Some who had no idea I existed until the $100,000 painting went viral. And, surprisingly, my parents. They stood in the back, quiet but proud. My mom had tears in her eyes. My dad held a small wrapped box. Later, I opened it alone. Inside was the same sketchbook I used in high school. The one they had told me to put away and focus on real things. They had kept it all this time. There was a note inside. We should have believed in you. Thank you for believing in yourself. I didn't cry. I smiled because I knew now that everything I'd gone through, the rejection, the loneliness, the heartbreak, had sculpted the life I was living. I wasn't bitter. I was free, and I was finally, fully, unapologetically, the artist I was always meant to be.